On the morning of August 22, 1911, a French painter named Louis Béraud walked into the Louvre, set up his easel in the Salon Carré, and waited. He was there to paint a comedic scene, a woman admiring her reflection in the glass of a famous portrait. But the portrait wasn't there, just 4 iron pegs in the wall where it used to hang. Béraud flagged down a guard. The guard assumed it had gone to the photography studio. It hadn't. By the time anyone understood what had actually happened, the most audacious art theft in history was already 28 hours old. Let's establish the scene, because the scene is almost comically inadequate for what it contains. The year is 1911. The Louvre is one of the largest museums in the world, housed in a former royal palace along the Seine. It employs hundreds of guards. It receives thousands of visitors a day. And in one of its grand salons hangs a painting that, at this moment in history, is admired but not worshipped. It is Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of a Florentine noblewoman, painted around 1503. It measures roughly 30 inches by 21 inches, smaller than most people imagine. It has been in French royal collections since the 1500s. Connoisseurs respect it. Art historians have written about it. But it is not in August of 1911, the Mona Lisa the world knows today. It is one masterpiece among many in a very crowded room. When Béraud's inquiry finally reached the right ears, the museum's head of security checked the photography studio, then the restoration workshop. Then, with the particular dread of someone who has just run out of explanations, he checked the stairwell. There on a dusty step he found the frame, just the frame. The painting itself was gone. Vincenzo Peruggia was 29 years old. He was Italian, born in a small village near Lake Como, and he had come to Paris the way many young men came to Paris looking for work. He found it. He had spent time as a decorator, a house painter, and crucially as a contract worker at the Louvre itself, where in 1908 he had helped install the glass cases used to protect certain paintings. He knew the building. He knew how it breathed on a Monday morning when the museum was closed to the public and the guards were few. What is documented fact? He entered the Louvre on the night of Sunday, August 20th, 1911, and hid in a storage closet until morning. He was wearing a white workman's smock, the kind that made him look like any of dozens of maintenance staff. He walked to the Salon Carré, lifted the painting from its hooks, carried it to the stairwell, removed it from its frame, tucked it under his smock, and walked out a side door. The whole operation took, by most reconstructions, less than 15 minutes. What is legend, or at least unverified, that he was recruited by a mysterious Argentine con man named Eduardo de Valfiano, who allegedly planned to sell forged copies to wealthy collectors who believed they were buying the stolen original. This story came from a journalist's account published years later and has never been fully corroborated. The historians treat it with caution. What is not in dispute, Peruggia acted. He walked home to his apartment at 5 Rue de l'Hôpital Saint-Louis with the Mona Lisa under his arm. The Louvre closed for a week. This was unprecedented. Thousands of Parisians lined up outside, not to mourn, not exactly, but to look at the empty space where the painting had been. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the blank wall drawing larger crowds than the painting itself ever had. There is something very human in that, and also something very on brand for 1911. The French press erupted. The international press followed. The theft was front-page news from Paris to New York to Tokyo. The French government convened emergency sessions. The head of the Louvre's security was fired. The poet Guillaume Apollinaire, flamboyant, brilliant, perpetually embroiled in controversy, was arrested. Here is why, and it is not a flattering story for the investigators. Apollinaire had a secretary named Gary Pierrot, who had a habit of stealing small antiquities from the Louvre as a kind of personal amusement. Pierrot had sold a couple of these stolen artifacts to his employer's friend, a young Spanish painter named Pablo Picasso. When the Mona Lisa disappeared, Pierrot decided to mail a stolen Iberian stone head to a Paris newspaper, essentially as a prank. This connected him, and by extension Apollinaire, to the Louvre. Both men were questioned. Apollinaire was briefly jailed. Picasso was brought in for interrogation. By all accounts, including Picasso's own later recollection, he was terrified and denied knowing Apollinaire well, which was not true. Both men were released within days. No evidence connected them to the painting. The real thief was sitting in his apartment 2 miles away, in a building where he had hidden the Mona Lisa inside a specially constructed false-bottom trunk. This is where the story gets genuinely strange. Peruggia did not sell it, he did not ransom it. He did not, as far as investigators have ever established, have a concrete plan for what came next. He went to work, he moved apartments at least once, he took other jobs. And all the while the Mona Lisa sat in that trunk, wrapped in red cloth, behind a false panel in his room. The investigation had been extensive by the standards of the era. Louvre was subjected to a thorough inventory. Fingerprints were taken, the technique was relatively new, and the investigators actually found Peruggia's thumbprint on the empty frame's protective glass. The problem was that Peruggia's prints were on file from a prior arrest in Paris, but a clerical error meant the comparison was never correctly made. He was, in fact, interviewed by detectives at his apartment in the early days of the investigation. He was asked if he had seen anything suspicious. He said no. They thanked him and left. The painting was in the trunk 6 feet from where they stood. That is documented. What Peruggia later said in court about his motivation is more complicated. He claimed he was moved by patriotism, that Leonardo was Italian, that the painting had been looted by Napoleon, and that it deserved to be returned to Italy. The looting story was incorrect. The painting had been in France since the 1500s, brought there legitimately. Whether Peruggia believed his own narrative or constructed it after the fact, historians disagree. What isn't disputed is that for 2 years, the most wanted painting in the world sat under false floor in a working man's apartment, and nobody came back for it. In late 1913, Peruggia made his move. He traveled to Florence and contacted Alfredo Geri, a reputable antiques dealer who had recently placed advertisements. This is documented, indicating interest in acquiring notable works of art. Peruggia wrote to Geri under false name, describing himself as an Italian patriot who had recovered a great national treasure from France. He wanted 50,000 lire in exchange for returning it to Italy. Geri, to his enormous credit, did not dismiss the letter as the rambling of a fantasist. He arranged a meeting at his gallery. Peruggia arrived and produced the painting. Geri asked to authenticate it. He contacted Giovanni Poggi, the director of the Uffizi Gallery, who came to examine it. The painting was genuine. Peruggia was asked to leave it for safekeeping while the payment was arranged. He agreed. What he did not know was that Geri and Poggi had gone immediately to the police. Peruggia was arrested at his hotel the following morning, December 11, 1913. He had kept the Mona Lisa for 28 months. The news of its recovery touched off celebrations in Florence and then in Paris. The painting was taken to the Uffizi, where it was displayed for 2 weeks before an enormous crowd of Italians who came to see, by this point, the most talked-about painting in the world. Then it was returned to France. The trial of Vincenzo Peruggia took place in Florence in June 1914. It lasted 2 days. He pleaded guilty. His lawyers leaned hard on the patriotism defense, the romantic image of a simple Italian workman, wronged by history, trying to reclaim a national treasure for its rightful home. The Italian press was more sympathetic than perhaps the facts warranted. Peruggia received a sentence of 1 year and 15 days. With time already served and a reduction on appeal, he was free within 7 months. He subsequently served in the Italian army during the First World War, returned to France after the war, married, ran a paint shop, and died in 1925 at the age of 44. None of the 50,000 lire ever changed hands. Alfredo Geri received a reward from the French government for his role in the recovery. Giovanni Poggi received a decoration. The painting returned to its hooks in the Louvre in January 1914, where it has remained, behind increasingly elaborate security, ever since. Here is the irony that this entire story exists to deliver. Before August 21, 1911, the Mona Lisa was one of approximately 2,000 paintings in the Louvre. It was famous among scholars and painters. It had inspired commentary from Vasari in the 16th century and from Walter Pater in the 19th. But a survey of popular culture in 1910 would have found it far from the dominant image it would become. The theft changed everything. And it changed it by being a crime. The blank wall, the missing painting, the manhunt, the ridiculous suspects, the 2 years of mystery, the triumphant recovery, the Florentine crowds, the Parisian celebrations. This was a narrative, and it ran in newspapers around the world for 28 months. Millions of people who had never been to the Louvre and never would go learn the name, the image, the woman's strange almost smile. Reproductions multiplied. When it returned to its hooks, it returned as something it had not been before, the most famous painting on earth, which is subtly different from the best painting on earth or the most beautiful or the most technically accomplished. It was famous because it had been stolen, and the theft had made it the subject of a global story, and stories do what oil and canvas cannot do alone. They make us feel that something matters before we have even seen it. The man who stole it got 7 months. The painting got immortality, and the question that the historical record leaves genuinely open is this: would you have given it back?